There are certain evenings that remain etched in one's memory with the clarity of frost upon glass. Beautiful, intricate, and invariably concealing something far more sinister beneath their crystalline surface. Such was the night of December 23, 1934, when the annual Christmas Charity Gala at Thornfield Hall witnessed what the newspapers would later term the impossible vanishing of Father Winter. I confess that I had little enthusiasm for attending Lady Pemberton's elaborate Christmas masquerade, having grown rather weary of the endless social obligations that marked the London season. However, my dear friend Captain Hastings had accepted the invitation on both our behalves, declaring with characteristic optimism that a bit of seasonal cheer might do us both some good, and besides, the cause is worthy, orphaned children and all that. Thornfield Hall, that magnificent Georgian mansion overlooking Hyde Park, had been transformed into a winter wonderland worthy of the Brothers Grimm. The grand ballroom sparkled beneath cascading chandeliers, while artificial snow drifted gently from concealed mechanisms in the ornate ceiling. The guests, resplendent in their holiday finery and elaborate masks, created a scene of almost theatrical beauty. At the center of it all stood the evening's focal point, an ornate throne draped in ermine and midnight blue velvet, from which the evening's honored guest would distribute gifts to the assembled children from various London orphanages. The gathering of suspects. A cast. Most intriguing. Sir Montague Blackwood, the evening's host and benefactor, was a man whose reputation preceded him into every drawing-room in London. At 68, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that came from a lifetime of industrial success and philanthropic endeavors. Known affectionately as Father Winter for his generous Christmas donations and his magnificent white beard, Sir Montague had made the Charity Gala an annual tradition that drew the cream of London society. Yet, as I observed the assembled guests that evening, I could not shake the feeling that beneath the festive atmosphere lay currents of tension that had little to do with seasonal celebration. Lady Pemberton herself, our gracious hostess, seemed unusually anxious, her gloved hands fidgeting with her pearl necklace as she moved through the crowd with forced gaiety. At 45, she remained a handsome woman, though the years had etched lines of worry around her intelligent green eyes. "Montague seems rather subdued this evening," she confided to Captain Hastings during a brief respite from her hostess duties. "He's been receiving some rather unpleasant correspondence lately. Business matters, I believe, though he won't discuss the details." Near the refreshment table stood Dr. Edmund Carstairs, Sir Montague's personal physician and long-time friend. A distinguished gentleman of 50-odd years, Dr. Carstairs possessed the kind of steady demeanor one associates with the medical profession. Yet I noticed that his usual jovial manner seemed strained, and he consumed rather more champagne than was his custom. "The old fellow's been under tremendous pressure," Dr. Carstairs murmured to his companion, Mrs. Vivian Ashford, Sir Montague's widowed sister. "The business with the will, you know, and then there's the matter of young Gerald's debts." Mrs. Ashford, an elegant woman in her early 60s, nodded gravely. She had raised her nephew Gerald following his parents' untimely death in a motor accident, and the young man's gambling habits had become something of a family scandal. Gerald Blackwood himself lurked near the card-room, a handsome but dissolute young man of 28 whose expensive tastes far exceeded his modest allowance. The performance, Father Winter takes the stage. At precisely 9 o'clock, the orchestra struck up a festive melody, and Sir Montague made his grand entrance. Dressed in magnificent robes of white and gold, with an elaborate mask depicting a benevolent winter king, he cut an impressive figure as he processed through the parted crowd toward his throne. The assembled children from St. Bartholomew's orphanage waited with barely contained excitement, their scrubbed faces glowing in the chandelier light. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Mr. Theodore Pembridge, Sir Montague's private secretary, "I present to you Father Winter, patron saint of Christmas charity." The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Sir Montague settled upon his throne and raised his jeweled sceptre. It was then that I noticed something peculiar, a brief exchange of glances between Mrs. Ashford and young Gerald, followed by an almost imperceptible nod from the latter toward the servants' entrance. "Now then, my dear children," Sir Montague's voice boomed from behind his mask, "who has been good this year and deserves a special Christmas gift?" The Vanishing, an impossible mystery. What happened next defied all rational explanation. As Sir Montague reached for the first wrapped present from the golden basket beside his throne, the great chandeliers suddenly flickered and went out, plunging the ballroom into complete darkness. The blackout lasted no more than 30 seconds. I counted them myself. Yet when the lights blazed forth once more, the throne stood empty. Sir Montague had vanished completely. The magnificent robes lay crumpled upon the throne as though their wearer had simply evaporated. The elaborate mask had fallen to the floor, its painted smile now seeming grotesquely inappropriate. The jeweled sceptre rolled slowly across the marble floor, coming to rest at the feet of a terrified child who began to wail. Lady Pemberton's scream pierced the stunned silence that followed. "Montague! Dear God, where is he?" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests pushed forward toward the throne while others rushed toward the exits. Mr. Pembridge, his face ashen, attempted to restore order while Dr. Carstairs knelt beside the empty throne, examining the abandoned robes with professional thoroughness. "The exits!" cried Captain Hastings, ever practical. "Someone must have seen him leave." But this proved impossible. The ballroom had only 3 entrances, the main doors through which we had all entered, the servants' door near the refreshment table, and a small side entrance that led to the library. All 3 had been clearly visible even in the darkness, their frames outlined by the light from the corridors beyond. The footmen stationed at each entrance swore that no one had passed them during the blackout. The investigation begins. Clues most disturbing. Inspector Bradshaw of Scotland Yard arrived within the hour, a competent but unimaginative man who approached the mystery with methodical thoroughness. His examination of the scene revealed several disturbing details that transformed what might have been a theatrical prank into something far more sinister. Upon the marble floor beside the throne, barely visible unless one knew where to look, were 3 small drops of blood. The jeweled sceptre, when examined closely, showed traces of the same crimson stain upon its ornate handle. Most ominous of all, clutched within the folds of the abandoned robes, was a small piece of paper bearing a single word, written in a shaking hand. "Forgive." "Gentlemen," Inspector Bradshaw announced to the assembled guests, "I must ask that no one leave the premises until this matter is resolved. We are dealing with what appears to be a case of foul play." The inspector's words sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the crowd. Mrs. Ashford collapsed into a chair, fanning herself vigorously, while young Gerald's face had taken on a distinctly greenish hue. Dr. Carstairs continued his examination of the physical evidence with professional detachment, though I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he handled the blood-stained sceptre. The call for expertise. Enter Hercule Poirot. It was Lady Pemberton who first suggested consulting a detective of more specialized talents. "Inspector," she said quietly, drawing Bradshaw aside, "this case is beyond ordinary police methods. We need someone who understands the impossible, someone who can see what others cannot." "You're suggesting we call in that Belgian fellow?" Bradshaw asked with obvious reluctance. "Hercule Poirot." "I am indeed," Lady Pemberton replied firmly. "If anyone can solve the mystery of how a man can vanish from a locked room in full view of 200 witnesses, it is Monsieur Poirot." And so it was that at 11:30 on that snowy December evening, a telephone call was placed to the modest flat in Whitehaven Mansions, where the world's most famous detective was undoubtedly enjoying a quiet evening with his tisane and his thoughts. The game, as they say, was afoot. though none of us could have imagined the dark secrets that would be revealed before Father Winter's fate was finally known. The snow continued to fall outside Thornfield Hall, blanketing London in pristine white, while within those elegant walls a most perplexing mystery awaited the arrival of Hercule Poirot and his little grey cells. The taxicab bearing Hercule Poirot arrived at Thornfield Hall precisely at midnight, its headlamps cutting through the swirling snow that continued to blanket the estate's circular drive. I watched from the entrance hall as my friend emerged with characteristic precision, adjusting his overcoat with meticulous care before surveying the imposing Georgian facade with those penetrating green eyes that missed nothing. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he said as I approached, "you appear considerably disturbed. This mystery of the vanishing Father Winter, it has affected you profoundly. No?" Indeed, the evening's impossible events had left me thoroughly shaken. Inspector Bradshaw approached with evident relief, clearly grateful to transfer responsibility for this baffling case to more capable hands. "Monsieur Poirot, thank goodness you've come. I confess I've never encountered anything quite like this situation," Bradshaw admitted, mopping his brow despite the December chill. "Indeed?" Poirot removed his overcoat and handed it to the waiting footman with a courteous nod. "Then perhaps you would escort Poirot to the scene of this impossibility, and we shall see what the little grey cells can make of it." The ballroom had been cleared of guests, though the decorations remained exactly as they had been during the evening's festivities. The artificial snow continued its gentle descent from the ceiling mechanisms, creating an oddly peaceful atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the sinister implications of that empty throne. Poirot approached the scene with the reverence of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. He circled the throne 3 times, his head tilted at precisely the angle I had learned indicated deep concentration. Occasionally he paused to examine some detail invisible to the rest of us, his fingers hovering millimeters above surfaces he was careful not to disturb. "The blood," he murmured, kneeling beside the marble floor with surprising agility. 3 drops, you observe, Inspector. But notice, the pattern, it is most curious. Not the splash of sudden violence, but rather the careful placement of deliberation. He rose and turned his attention to the abandoned costume, lifting each piece with delicate precision. And this note, "Forgive." Does a murderer write such melodrama? Or perhaps a man who seeks absolution from an audience? "The lights failed for exactly 30 seconds, Bradshaw reported. Yet no one could have left the room unseen. "Eh bien," Poirot murmured thoughtfully. "Then either this room is larger than we perceive, or everyone's observation was smaller than they believe." Lady Pemberton approached hesitantly, her earlier composure now replaced by obvious distress. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot express my gratitude that you've come. Montague is such a dear friend. The thought that someone might have harmed him in my own home is unbearable." Poirot studied her with those remarkably perceptive eyes. "You speak of harm, madame. Yet we have found no body. Tell me of these unpleasant letters Sir Montague had been receiving." Her hands fluttered nervously to her pearl necklace. Anonymous correspondence, accusations about his business practices, suggestions that he had forgotten his obligations to injured workers' families. I kept them from him, thinking them mere malicious gossip. "Ah, but one cannot spare others from truth indefinitely," Poirot observed gently. Dr. Carstairs approached, polishing his spectacles with nervous precision. "This entire affair is intolerable, Monsieur Poirot. Montague was not a well man. His blood pressure, you understand. He should never have undertaken such a strenuous evening." "You warned him against participating?" "I advised moderation. He laughed. He always dismissed prudent counsel." The doctor's voice carried a note of professional frustration. From across the room, young Gerald Blackwood watched our conversation with poorly concealed anxiety. When Poirot's attention turned to him, the young man affected nonchalance, though his hands betrayed him with their nervous trembling. "You were gambling this evening, Monsieur Girard?" Poirot inquired mildly. "In the card room, naturally. Half the county witnessed my presence there. During the blackout, we all remained seated. Ask anyone." His voice carried forced confidence. "Indeed, courage often sits very still," Poirot murmured. "It is fear that fidgets most conspicuously." Mrs. Vivian Ashford, Sir Montague's sister, had remained silent throughout these exchanges, but now she rose with dignity. "Inspector, must this catechism continue indefinitely? My brother is missing, possibly dead, and we waste precious time with questions." Poirot's eyes softened with understanding. "Madame, I comprehend your distress. But in cases such as these, it is precisely the questions that seem wasteful which often prove most illuminating. The truth she hides beneath layers of politeness and propriety, but Poirot, he will find her." The investigation had begun in earnest, and already the little grey cells were working furiously to unravel the impossible mystery of Father Winter's vanishing. The pale December morning light filtering through Thornfield Hall's frost-etched windows revealed details that the previous evening's theatrical lighting had concealed. Poirot had risen early, insisting upon a thorough re-examination of the ballroom before conducting formal interviews. I watched with familiar fascination as he moved through the vast space with the precision of a master craftsman examining his tools. "Observe, mon ami Hastings," he said, kneeling beside the empty throne with surprising agility, "the pattern of these blood drops, not the wild splash of sudden violence, but 3 precise spots, deliberate, almost ceremonial in their placement." He rose and lifted the abandoned mask with delicate fingers. "And see here, the strap is torn, not unbuckled. Someone pulled this away in great haste, or perhaps wished to create the impression of haste." The jeweled scepter lay where it had fallen, and Poirot examined it without touching the surface. "There is the faintest odor clinging to the handle," he murmured, his nostrils dilating slightly. "Iodine, perhaps. One encounters such scents in medical establishments." Inspector Bradshaw had established our interview headquarters in Lady Pemberton's morning room, but Poirot preferred the intimacy of a smaller drawing room for his methodical questioning. The first to be summoned was Mr. Theodore Pembridge, Sir Montague's private secretary, whose usually impeccable composure had been shattered by the night's events. Sir Montague was deeply troubled in recent weeks, Pembridge admitted, his hands trembling as he adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. The Trans-African Mining Company investment had collapsed spectacularly. He stood to lose nearly half his personal fortune. Millions of pounds simply vanished. "And this prompted his sudden interest in revising his will?" Poirot inquired gently. Pembridge nodded gravely. "I typed the new document myself just last week. The changes were dramatic. The bulk of his estate was to be left to charitable foundations, with only modest provisions for family members. Young Gerald would have been virtually disinherited." Who was aware of these alterations? Mrs. Ashford, certainly. She felt Gerald deserved warning. Dr. Carstairs knew, as Sir Montague discussed everything with him, and I believe Lady Pemberton suspected, though she was not informed directly. Our next interview was with Thomas Whitmore, the footman who had guarded the servants' entrance during the crucial 30 seconds. A former soldier with an honest face and steady manner, he appeared genuinely distressed by his inability to explain the impossible vanishing. "I never left my post, sir," he insisted. "Could see the doorway clear as day from the corridor lights, and would have heard footsteps on the marble floors. Sound carries something fierce in that ballroom." "Tell me," Poirot said thoughtfully, "in your years of service here, have you observed any architectural curiosities about the ballroom's construction?" Thomas scratched his head. "Well, sir, there's the old dumbwaiter system from when the house was built. Connects the ballroom to the kitchen below and the storage rooms above. Behind that decorative panel near the throne it is. But it ain't been used in decades. Mechanisms all rusted up." Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest. "Ah, but broken things sometimes work in ways their makers never intended." Dr. Edmund Carstairs joined us, looking haggard and considerably older than his 60 years. The strain had clearly affected him deeply, and his usual steady hands showed a pronounced tremor as he lit his cigarette. Montague's health was precarious, he said quietly. Severe angina, brought on by the stress of his financial troubles. I had strongly advised against the rigors of last evening's performance, but he was obstinate. These anonymous letters he'd been receiving only added to his burden, accusations about unsafe working conditions in his factories, suggestions that he had deliberately minimized compensation to injured workers' families. "You believe these accusations to be unfounded?" Poirot asked. Dr. Carstairs hesitated. Montague was complex, generous to a fault in public, but in private business matters, he could be ruthlessly practical. The letters troubled him because they contained enough truth to be damaging. Mrs. Vivian Ashford entered with dignified composure, though her grief had hardened into something more formidable. "My brother was a controlling man, Monsieur Poirot. He enjoyed holding the purse strings, making others dependent upon his generosity. Gerald has made mistakes, yes, but Montague's threats of disinheritance were cruel beyond measure. The young man's debts are substantial, considerable. He owes money to several unsavory characters, the sort who do not accept excuses or delays. Montague had been paying them off, but threatened to cease if Gerald did not reform completely. The new will would have left my nephew utterly destitute. Finally, Gerald Blackwood himself appeared, attempting an air of bravado that was betrayed by his pallor and the nervous trembling of his hands. "I was in the card room the entire time," he insisted. "Ask anyone. I lost a hand to Pembridge at precisely the moment the lights failed." "You were aware of your uncle's intentions regarding his will?" Poirot asked softly. Gerald's facade crumbled slightly. He'd threatened it before, just his way of keeping me in line. But if he actually went through with it... His voice dropped to a whisper. "Those men I owe money to, they don't accept charity cases. If I'm disinherited, I'm a dead man." As the morning progressed, Poirot returned repeatedly to the ballroom, examining details that seemed insignificant to the rest of us. He noted that the golden gift basket was surprisingly heavy, despite containing only lightweight presents, observed a small thread of dark wool caught on the throne's carved back, and spent considerable time studying the decorative panel that concealed the old dumbwaiter system. "The little grey cells, they begin to see a pattern," he murmured to me as we stood before the empty throne. "Everyone speaks of what they did not do during those 30 seconds of darkness, but it is what they did do that interests Poirot most, profoundly." The web of motives was becoming increasingly complex. Financial ruin, disinheritance, professional disgrace, and family resentment all swirled around the vanished figure of Father Winter. Yet I could see that Poirot's methodical approach was beginning to reveal the human truth beneath the impossible mystery. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Thornfield Hall's frost-etched windows as Inspector Bradshaw assembled what he considered compelling evidence against young Gerald Blackwood. The inspector's methodical nature had served him well in simpler cases, and he approached this mystery with the same systematic determination that had earned him his reputation at Scotland Yard. "The case against the nephew grows stronger by the hour, Monsieur Poirot," Bradshaw declared, spreading his findings across Lady Pemberton's mahogany writing desk. "We've discovered this in his coat pocket, a pawn ticket dated just 2 days ago for a signet ring bearing the Blackwood family crest. Sir Montague was known to treasure that particular piece." Poirot examined the ticket with characteristic precision, his green eyes noting every detail of the cramped handwriting and official stamps. "Indeed, Inspector. And the sum advanced by the pawnbroker?" £300, a considerable amount, but hardly enough to satisfy gambling debts rumored to exceed 5,000. The young man was desperate, growing more so by the day. Gerald himself, when confronted with this evidence, seemed to age a decade in mere moments. His carefully maintained facade of nonchalant confidence crumbled like autumn leaves. That ring. Uncle Montague gave it to me years ago. He said it would be mine eventually anyway. I never thought he'd miss it, and I fully intended to reclaim it once my luck turned." "Your luck, monsieur?" Poirot inquired gently. "Or perhaps you sought to improve your circumstances through more direct means?" "I never touched him." Gerald's voice cracked with desperation. "Yes, I was terrified about the will, about what those creditors might do if I couldn't pay. But murder? Kidnapping? I'm not capable of such things." Dr. Carstairs, who had been listening with professional detachment, cleared his throat thoughtfully. "The boy has always been weak rather than vicious. Montague knew this. It's why he used financial pressure rather than outright disinheritance. He believed Gerald might still reform given proper motivation." Mrs. Ashford, her maternal instincts warring with mounting evidence, clutched her handkerchief with trembling fingers. "Gerald has made mistakes, yes, but he's not a violent man. This is all circumstantial, surely." Inspector Bradshaw, however, was building momentum. "We've also discovered that young Blackwood left the card room briefly during the evening, ostensibly to visit the gentleman's convenience, but the timing coincides suspiciously with the period just before the blackout." "The servants can confirm this?" Poirot asked. "Thomas Whitmore recalls seeing him near the service corridor approximately 10 minutes before the lights failed. When questioned, Blackwood claimed he was lost, unfamiliar with the servants' passages despite having visited this house countless times since childhood." Poirot returned to the ballroom, where police constables continued their methodical examination of the dumbwaiter mechanism. The ancient system groaned and protested under their efforts, rust flaking away like dried blood. Yet something about the scene troubled him, a discord between the obvious solution and the subtle details that whispered of deeper complexities. "This mechanism, Hastings," he murmured, running his gloved finger along the wooden frame. "It has been disturbed recently, yes. But observe, the scratches are shallow, superficial. If a man of Sir Montague's substantial build had been forced through this opening, the damage would be considerable, no?" "I peered at the markings," he indicated. "Perhaps the kidnapper was more careful than we assumed." "Or perhaps," Poirot said softly, "we assume too much about the nature of the crime itself." Near the throne, he knelt to examine the golden gift basket that had contained the children's presents. Something caught his attention. A tiny fragment of crimson tinsel, far richer and more lustrous than the silver decorations adorning the ballroom. He preserved it carefully in his handkerchief. "This is not from Lady Pemberton's decorations," he observed. "The quality is superior, the color distinctive. It suggests something more personal, more intimate than mere festive ornamentation." Lady Pemberton, overhearing this observation, approached with obvious anxiety. "I supervised all the decorations personally, Monsieur Poirot. Every ribbon, every ornament was chosen with care. That tinsel is not from my arrangements." "Then from whence did it come, madame? And how did it find its way into the basket beside our vanished Father Winter?" Inspector Bradshaw, meanwhile, had discovered additional evidence supporting his theory. "We've found witnesses who can place Gerald near the ballroom service entrance during the crucial period. The young man's story about being lost simply doesn't hold water." Yet as the case against Gerald Blackwood seemed to solidify, Poirot's demeanor suggested growing skepticism rather than satisfaction. He moved through the crime scene with the patience of a scholar examining ancient texts, noting details that others dismissed as insignificant. "The psychology of this crime," he murmured to me as we stood before the empty throne. "It does not align with simple desperation. The theatrical elements, the costume carefully arranged, the blood drops precisely placed, the note reading 'Forgive,' these suggest someone with a flair for drama, someone who understands the power of symbolism." "You don't believe Gerald is capable of such sophistication?" "I believe, mon ami, that we must distinguish between what appears obvious and what is actually true. The little grey cells, they are not yet satisfied with this convenient solution." As the afternoon wore on, the evidence against Gerald continued to mount. Yet Poirot's attention remained focused on seemingly trivial details: the quality of that crimson tinsel, the precise arrangement of the abandoned costume, the theatrical timing of the blackout. He was like a master musician detecting false notes in an otherwise harmonious composition. "The game grows more complex," he said finally, his eyes reflecting the intense mental activity I'd learned to associate with his most challenging cases. But complexity, she often reveals truth more clearly than simplicity. We are approaching the heart of this mystery, but we must be careful not to mistake the obvious for the actual. The false lead was firmly established, the obvious suspect clearly identified, yet Poirot's little grey cells continued their relentless work, sifting through the layers of deception for the psychological truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of apparent guilt. By the third day of our investigation, Inspector Bradshaw's confidence in Gerald Blackwood's guilt had crystallized into absolute certainty. The evidence seemed overwhelming: the pawn ticket, the desperate financial circumstances, the suspicious movements during the crucial evening. Yet Poirot's demeanor suggested not satisfaction, but growing unease, like a master musician detecting discordant notes in an otherwise harmonious composition. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly as we stood in Lady Pemberton's morning room, "you construct your case like a house of cards, impressive in its height, but vulnerable to the slightest breath of contrary evidence. The little grey cells, they whisper of complexities you have not considered." Bradshaw bristled at this implied criticism. "The facts speak for themselves, Monsieur Poirot. Young Blackwood had motive, opportunity, and means. What more do you require?" "I require," Poirot replied with gentle precision, "the truth. And truth she is often far more subtle than mere facts." To demonstrate his point, Poirot requested that we gather the principal suspects in the ballroom for what he termed a small experiment in human nature. Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Ashford, Dr. Carstairs, Mr. Pembridge, and even young Gerald were assembled near the empty throne, their faces reflecting varying degrees of anxiety and curiosity. "We shall recreate not the crime itself," Poirot announced, "but the psychological atmosphere that made such a crime possible. Each of you will stand precisely where you stood during the crucial 30 seconds of darkness." As they arranged themselves according to their memories, Poirot moved among them like a choreographer, noting subtle details that escaped the rest of us. He observed how Mrs. Ashford's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her position, how Dr. Carstairs unconsciously checked his pocket watch, how Gerald's eyes darted repeatedly toward the servants' entrance. "Now," Poirot continued, "we shall have our moment of darkness, but this time I ask each of you to listen not with your ears alone, but with your conscience. Sometimes the heart hears what the mind refuses to acknowledge." Inspector Bradshaw reluctantly signaled for the lights to be extinguished. In the profound darkness that followed, I became acutely aware of every sound: the rustle of fabric, the barely audible intake of breath, the distant ticking of the hallway clock. But there was something else, a faint medicinal odor that seemed to drift through the air like a ghostly presence. When the lights returned, Poirot's penetrating gaze swept across each face with the intensity of a prosecutor examining witnesses. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "Fear, guilt, and deception, they each have their own distinctive fragrance." Dr. Carstairs, who had been maintaining professional composure throughout our investigation, suddenly appeared deeply troubled. His usual steady hands showed a pronounced tremor as he reached for his handkerchief, and when Poirot's attention focused upon him, the physician's face drained of color. "Doctor," Poirot said with deceptive gentleness, "you have been Sir Montague's confidant for many years. Tell me, what secrets weighed most heavily upon his conscience in recent weeks?" The question struck like a physical blow. Dr. Carstairs swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. That is to say, professional confidentiality prevents me from, but professional ethics also demand honesty when lives are at stake," Poirot observed. The Hippocratic Oath speaks of doing no harm, does it not? Yet sometimes silence itself becomes a form of harm. It was then that Mrs. Ashford made an unexpected revelation. "Edmund has been visiting Montague at all hours recently," she said quietly. "Private consultations that seemed to distress them both greatly. I assumed they were medical matters, but perhaps they concerned matters of conscience rather than health," Poirot finished. "The anonymous letters, the accusations about industrial negligence, the families of injured workers. These were not merely business problems, were they, Doctor?" Dr. Carstairs' composure finally cracked. Those families, the children especially. Montague knew what the chemical exposure was doing to them, but the legal ramifications, the financial liability. I begged him to provide proper medical care, but he insisted on protecting the company's interests. This revelation cast the entire investigation in a new light. The missing industrialist was not merely a victim of family greed or business rivalry, but potentially a man whose conscience had finally overwhelmed his pragmatic nature. The note reading "Forgive" took on deeper significance, not a victim's plea, but perhaps a perpetrator's confession. The psychology of guilt, Poirot mused as we left the ballroom. It can drive men to extraordinary measures, but whether those measures include staged disappearances or genuine repentance remains to be determined. The case was evolving beyond simple motives of inheritance and revenge into something far more complex. A moral reckoning that had been building for years, finally reaching its inevitable climax on that snowy December evening when Father Winter vanished from his throne. The morning following Dr. Carstairs' emotional revelation found Poirot in contemplative mood, standing before the frost-etched windows of Thornfield Hall's morning room. Inspector Bradshaw remained convinced of Gerald Blackwood's guilt, yet something in the detective's demeanor suggested he was orchestrating a far more subtle investigation than the obvious evidence would suggest. "The psychology of guilt, mon ami," Poirot observed to me quietly. "It manifests in curious ways. A man who has harmed children through industrial negligence might seek absolution through conspicuous charity toward other children. The annual Christmas gala, the elaborate Father Winter performance. Perhaps these were not mere philanthropy, but attempted redemption." His next move was characteristically unexpected. Rather than pursuing the industrial angle directly, he requested that the children from St. Bartholomew's orphanage be brought back for what he termed a gentle conversation about their Christmas evening. Inspector Bradshaw protested this seeming frivolity, but Poirot's reputation commanded reluctant cooperation. The children were received in Lady Pemberton's smallest drawing room, where chocolate and biscuits created an atmosphere of trust rather than interrogation. Poirot's manner with them was masterful, patient, kind, yet subtly probing for details that adult witnesses might have missed or dismissed. Father Winter was very kind, offered a solemn little girl with plaited hair. But his beard tickled differently than last year, and he smelled like the school infirmary, that sharp smell matron uses on our cuts. "Iodine," Poirot murmured, his eyes sharpening with interest. A bright-eyed boy added eagerly, "His hands were different too, sir. Very thin fingers, and one had a black mark on it. Right here." He pointed to his own forefinger, "like when you've been writing with a leaky pen." I noticed because he tapped my hand when he gave me the toy soldier. These observations struck Poirot with obvious significance. The scent of iodine, the ink-stained finger of a clerk rather than an industrialist. Details that suggested the theatrical performance had been more complex than anyone had realized. After dismissing the children with additional treats, Poirot turned his attention to the adults with renewed purpose. He requested, under the guise of completing formal statements, that each principal suspect provide a specimen of their handwriting. The exercise seemed routine, yet I noticed how his penetrating gaze studied not just the writing, but the writers themselves. Mr. Pembridge hesitated for just an instant before complying, a hesitation so brief that only someone trained in human observation would have noticed. His writing, when produced, showed the practiced uniformity of a professional secretary. Yet there was a faint tremor in the formation of certain letters that suggested recent nervous strain. "Your hands, if you would permit," Poirot requested with characteristic politeness. "A small detail for my notes." Dr. Carstairs showed the expected iodine stains around his cuticles, consistent with his medical practice. But Pembridge's forefinger bore a telltale smear of ink exactly where the child had described seeing it on Father Winter's hand. Lady Pemberton, observing these subtle examinations, approached Poirot with obvious anxiety. "Monsieur, I feel I must tell you something about those anonymous letters Montague had been receiving. They weren't entirely anonymous. I recognized elements of the handwriting, though I tried to convince myself otherwise. Indeed, madam, they came from Elara Thorne, a seamstress who has done embroidery work for our charity events for years. Her child was born with terrible deformities. She blamed the chemical exposure from Montague's Manchester facility. The letters were filled with such pain, such accusation. This revelation cast the crimson tinsel in an entirely new light." Poirot examined the fragment again with renewed interest. This particular shade of red, it was Miss Thorne's signature in her embroidery work? Yes, she used it in all her finest pieces. It was her way of marking her craftsmanship. The psychological game was intensifying. Poirot announced, seemingly casually, that Sir Montague's revised will might be invalid due to witnessing technicalities, meaning the generous family provisions would remain in effect. The reaction was illuminating. Gerald's visible relief, Mrs. Ashford's calculating expression, but most significantly, Pembridge's involuntary glance toward the service stairs rather than toward Gerald. "Curious," Poirot murmured to me afterward, "how the mention of hidden documents draws the eye toward hiding places rather than toward supposed beneficiaries." That afternoon, he requested access to the servants' quarters below the ballroom, ostensibly to examine the old dumbwaiter system more thoroughly, but his real interest seemed focused on studying the reactions of those who knew he was conducting this search. He positioned Thomas Whitmore strategically to observe anyone who might attempt to interfere with or monitor his investigation. "The conscience, Hastings," he explained, quietly. "It compels action even when wisdom counsels stillness. Someone in this house cannot resist the urge to protect what they believe to be hidden, and that compulsion will reveal more than any physical evidence." As evening approached, the atmosphere at Thornfield Hall grew increasingly tense. The obvious case against Gerald was crumbling under the weight of psychological evidence pointing elsewhere, yet the true nature of Sir Montague's disappearance remained tantalizingly elusive. The crimson tinsel spoke of personal vendetta, the children's observations suggested elaborate deception, and the industrial guilt provided motive for desperate measures. Poirot settled into his characteristic pose of contemplation, hands folded, eyes half closed, yet I knew he was listening intently for the smallest sound that might betray a guilty conscience finally driven to action. The psychological pressure he had so carefully constructed was approaching its breaking point, and someone in Thornfield Hall was about to make the crucial mistake that would unravel the entire mystery of Father Winter's impossible vanishing. The snow continued its relentless descent outside Thornfield Hall as the fourth night of our investigation settled over the estate like a shroud. Poirot had positioned himself in the library with what appeared to be casual reading, yet I recognized the signs of his most intense concentration: the slight forward tilt of his head, the occasional tap of his manicured finger against the leather armrest, the way his green eyes seemed to focus on sounds rather than the printed page before him. "The psychological pressure, mon ami," he murmured to me as the hall clock struck 11. "It has reached the critical point. Someone in this house can no longer bear the weight of their secret knowledge. The conscience, she demands action, even when wisdom counsels stillness." His prediction proved remarkably prescient. Shortly after midnight, the faintest of sounds echoed through the corridors, not the random settling of an old house, but the deliberate, careful movements of someone who believed themselves unobserved. Poirot rose with fluid grace, motioning for silence as we made our way toward the source of the disturbance. The ballroom doors stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of lamplight that had no business existing at such an hour. Through the narrow opening, we observed a scene that cast the entire investigation in a dramatically different light. Mr. Theodore Pembridge, Sir Montague's meticulous private secretary, knelt beside the decorative panel concealing the ancient dumbwaiter system, working with desperate urgency to pry open sections that had remained sealed for decades. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal arms stained with rust and old grease. Beside him lay a small crowbar and what appeared to be several sheets of official correspondence. Most significantly, he was attempting to extract something from deep within the dumbwaiter shaft, something he handled with the reverence reserved for either treasure or evidence of the most damning variety. "Ah, Monsieur Pembridge," Poirot announced quietly as we entered the ballroom, "you conduct archaeological excavations at a most unusual hour." The secretary froze as though struck by lightning, his hand still buried within the shaft's recesses. When he turned to face us, his face displayed the unmistakable expression of a man whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed around him. "Monsieur Poirot." "Inspector Bradshaw," he stammered, attempting to withdraw his hand while maintaining some semblance of dignity. "I was merely, that is to say, conducting inventory of storage items." "At midnight?" Poirot inquired with characteristic gentleness. "And with a crowbar? Your inventory methods, they are most thorough." Inspector Bradshaw, who had followed us with admirable stealth, now stepped forward with official authority. "What exactly are you removing from that shaft, Pembridge?" The secretary's composure finally cracked under the weight of discovery. With trembling hands, he extracted a leather portfolio bound with red ribbon, the same distinctive crimson shade we had encountered repeatedly throughout our investigation. The portfolio was thick with documents, and even from a distance I could see that many bore official seals and signatures. "These are Sir Montague's private business records," Pembridge whispered, his voice barely audible. "The true accounts of the Trans-African Mining Company operations, the Manchester Chemical Facility reports, the correspondence with government inspectors, everything he never wanted made public." Poirot approached with the measured steps of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. "And you have been concealing these documents since Sir Montague's disappearance?" "I was following his final instructions," Pembridge replied, tears beginning to streak down his cheeks. "He told me to destroy them after the gala, to ensure they could never be used against the family or the company. But when he vanished, I couldn't bring myself to burn them. Too many families have suffered because of what's documented in these pages." The revelation struck with the force of revelation. Inspector Bradshaw reached for the portfolio, but Poirot's raised hand suggested patience. "Tell us, Monsieur Pembridge, about the anonymous letters Sir Montague had been receiving. They were not truly anonymous, were they?" "Elara Thorne wrote them," Pembridge confirmed, his voice gaining strength from confession. "Her child was born with terrible deformities from the chemical exposure at the Manchester facility. She had been one of our seamstresses for the charity events. That's how she knew so much about Sir Montague's personal habits, his schedule, his guilt over the industrial accidents. The crimson thread, the theatrical timing, the note reading, 'Forgive.' Suddenly, the psychological pattern became clear. This was not a crime of greed or family inheritance, but a moral reckoning years in the making. The children's observations about Father Winter," Poirot continued, "the scent of iodine, the ink-stained fingers, the different feel of the beard, these details troubled you greatly, did they not?" Pembridge's hands shook as he nodded. "I knew someone would eventually piece together the inconsistencies. Sir Montague was not himself that evening. The guilt, the pressure, the knowledge that those ledgers contained evidence of deliberate negligence that had harmed hundreds of families. He was consumed by remorse." "And yet," Poirot observed, examining the portfolio without opening it. "You risked returning here to retrieve these documents. Why not simply allow them to remain hidden?" "Because justice delayed is justice denied," Pembridge replied with surprising firmness. "Those families deserve compensation, proper medical care for their children, acknowledgement of what was done to them. Sir Montague's disappearance doesn't erase the obligation to make amends." The psychological game had yielded its most crucial evidence, not physical proof of violence, but documentary evidence of systematic negligence that explained the overwhelming guilt driving every aspect of this mystery. The industrial accidents, the cover-ups, the anonymous letters, and the theatrical Christmas performance all formed parts of a larger pattern of conscience, finally overwhelming pragmatic self-interest. As Inspector Bradshaw secured the documents, Poirot's expression suggested satisfaction tempered by the knowledge that deeper mysteries remained. The location of Sir Montague himself, the exact sequence of events during those crucial 30 seconds, and the ultimate resolution of both legal and moral obligations still awaited revelation. "The little grey cells," Poirot murmured as we prepared to leave the ballroom. "They begin to perceive the true architecture of this mystery. Not a crime of passion or greed, but a tragedy of conscience long deferred. The final act approaches, and with it, the complete truth about Father Winter's impossible vanishing." The discovery of the secret ledgers had transformed our investigation from a search for a missing person into an exploration of industrial guilt, moral responsibility, and the desperate measures people take when conscience finally overwhelms self-preservation. The stage was set for the final gathering, where all threads would be woven together into the complete tapestry of truth. The morning following Mr. Pembridge's midnight excavation brought an unexpected visitor to Thornfield Hall. Ilara Thorne arrived at Poirot's specific request, a slight woman whose hands bore the permanent stains of her seamstress trade and whose eyes held the hollow pain of a mother who had watched her child suffer from preventable industrial poisoning. Inspector Bradshaw received her with official courtesy, but Poirot greeted her with the grave respect he reserved for essential witnesses. The seamstress's testimony. "Mademoiselle Thorne," Poirot began gently, "your letters to Sir Montague were born of pain, but also of intimate knowledge. You understood his habits, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. Tell us about the evening of the gala." She clutched her worn handbag with trembling fingers. "I received a note asking me to come to the side entrance at 9:30. It bore Sir Montague's signature and spoke of making amends. I thought perhaps my letters had finally reached whatever conscience remained in that man." The note she produced was examined with Poirot's characteristic precision. "The handwriting appears authentic," she continued, "but the phrasing was wrong. Sir Montague always misspelled accommodate, a small vanity I noticed in his business correspondence. This note spelled it perfectly." "A forger with access to a dictionary," Poirot murmured, his green eyes sharpening with interest. "I saw someone in the Father Winter costume moving toward the service corridor just before the blackout," she continued. "I assumed it was Sir Montague coming to meet me, but when the darkness fell, I lost my courage and hid in the library. When the lights returned and everyone began shouting, I slipped away. I was afraid they would say I had no right to be there." The children's crucial evidence. After Ilara's departure, Poirot returned to the testimony of the orphaned children with renewed purpose. Their innocent observations had provided details that adult witnesses had missed or dismissed as irrelevant. The scent of iodine, the ink-stained finger, the different texture of the beard, he explained to me as we stood before the empty throne. These details point not to Sir Montague Blackwood, but to someone else entirely. Someone with access to medical supplies, whose hands bore the marks of extensive writing, whose knowledge of Sir Montague's mannerisms was intimate enough to fool children, but not detailed enough to replicate his physical characteristics perfectly. The implications struck with devastating clarity. Mr. Theodore Pembridge, as Sir Montague's private secretary, possessed exactly such knowledge and opportunity. His daily handling of correspondence would explain the ink stains. His nervous disposition during our investigation could account for seeking medical assistance, and his intimate familiarity with his employer's habits would enable a convincing impersonation. The Hidden Chamber. Thomas Whitmore's revelation about Pembridge's frequent visits to the storage areas led us to a discovery that transformed our understanding of the entire affair. Deep beneath the ballroom, behind stacks of forgotten furniture and holiday decorations, we found a small chamber that had been carefully prepared for extended habitation. The room contained a narrow bed, several days' worth of provisions, medical supplies, and, most significantly, a complete set of Sir Montague's clothing laid out with meticulous care. On a small writing table sat materials for correspondence and a partially completed letter in Sir Montague's distinctive handwriting, a comprehensive confession to the industrial negligence and detailed instructions for compensating the affected families. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed, examining the unfinished letter. The final piece of our psychological puzzle begins to reveal itself. This was not a crime of sudden passion or desperate greed, but a carefully orchestrated plan involving multiple conspirators. The medical conspiracy. Dr. Carstairs, who had been conspicuously absent during our basement exploration, appeared at the chamber entrance with the resigned expression of a man whose carefully guarded secret had been exposed. He was dying, the physician said simply. Advanced heart disease brought on by years of stress and guilt. He had weeks, perhaps months at most. The industrial accidents, the families he had harmed. He wanted to make amends before it was too late, but he also wanted to spare his family the public disgrace of criminal prosecution. The medical expertise required for the deception, the precise timing needed for the blackout, the sedatives necessary to manage such an elaborate fraud, all pointed to Dr. Carstairs' essential involvement in the conspiracy. The Hippocratic Oath speaks of doing no harm, he continued, his voice breaking with emotion. But what constitutes harm when a man's conscience has become his executioner? I provided the medical knowledge, the chemicals necessary for the deception, but I swear, when I last saw him, Sir Montague was very much alive. The psychological pressure mounts. That evening, Poirot's carefully constructed psychological pressure reached its breaking point. Someone in Thornfield Hall could no longer bear the weight of their secret knowledge, and conscience finally overwhelmed prudence. Shortly after midnight, the faint sounds of desperate activity echoed through the corridors. We discovered Mr. Pembridge in the ballroom, attempting to destroy evidence with the frantic urgency of a man whose carefully constructed deception was crumbling. But Poirot had anticipated this moment. The documents Pembridge was burning were clever forgeries, while the genuine ledgers remained safely hidden. "The conscience," Poirot observed as Inspector Bradshaw secured the scene. "It compels action, even when wisdom counsels stillness. The guilty mind cannot resist the urge to eliminate what it believes to be damning evidence." Poirot's hidden clue revealed. As dawn broke over Thornfield Hall, Poirot finally revealed the crucial insight that had been guiding his investigation from the beginning. Standing before the empty throne, he gestured toward the golden gift basket that had contained the children's presents. "The weight of this basket troubled me from the first examination," he explained. "Far too heavy for mere toys and sweets." The children noticed that Father Winter moved differently than in previous years, not with the confident stride of a healthy man, but with the careful movements of someone carrying an unexpected burden. The mechanical explanation for the impossible vanishing finally became clear. The gift basket had served a dual purpose, not only containing presents for the children, but concealing the means by which Sir Montague could be transported from the ballroom during those crucial 30 seconds of darkness. The dumbwaiter system, though ancient and supposedly inoperable, required only minor modifications to serve our conspirators' purpose, Poirot continued. During the blackout, while Pembridge created the theatrical illusion of struggle and disappearance, Sir Montague was already hidden within the specially modified basket, sedated by Dr. Carstairs' expertise and transported to the prepared chamber below. The final psychological game. The revelation of the mechanical deception was only the beginning. The true complexity lay in understanding the psychological motivations that had driven each participant to their respective roles in this elaborate moral drama. Sir Montague sought escape from the crushing weight of industrial guilt, Poirot explained. Dr. Carstairs provided medical expertise driven by professional compassion for a dying patient. But Mr. Pembridge, his motivations were far more complex and ultimately more sinister. The secretary's role had evolved from willing accomplice to manipulative controller. His intimate knowledge of Sir Montague's business affairs, combined with his access to the revised will and his understanding of the family's financial dependencies, had positioned him to benefit significantly from his employer's staged disappearance. The anonymous letters, the theatrical timing, the precise placement of evidence, all bore the hallmarks of someone who understood both the psychological vulnerabilities of his target and the investigative procedures that would follow, Poirot concluded. The stage was now set for the final gathering, where all threads would be woven together into the complete tapestry of truth. The impossible vanishing of Father Winter was about to be revealed as a complex conspiracy involving guilt, medical ethics, family loyalty, and ultimately the manipulation of a dying man's desperate desire for redemption. The little grey cells had unraveled the mechanical mystery, but the moral complexities of justice, forgiveness, and human nature remained to be fully explored in the climactic revelation that awaited. The afternoon rain had ceased, leaving Thornfield Hall, shrouded in the peculiar stillness that follows winter storms. Lady Pemberton's grand drawing-room had been arranged with mathematical precision, chairs positioned in a perfect semicircle facing the ornate fireplace, where Hercule Poirot stood with the composed dignity of a conductor preparing to lead his most complex symphony. The gathering. All threads converge. Inspector Bradshaw occupied his customary position near the mantelpiece, notebook at the ready, while the principal figures of our investigation arranged themselves with the nervous formality of defendants awaiting judgment. Lady Pemberton sat rigidly upright, her fingers worrying at her pearl necklace with unconscious anxiety. Mrs. Ashford maintained her dignified composure, though the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her inner turmoil. Young Gerald Blackwood had positioned himself near the window, as though contemplating escape, while Dr. Carstairs adopted the professional stillness that had served him throughout his medical career. Most significantly, Mr. Theodore Pembridge sat with meticulous attention to his appearance, every crease pressed, every button fastened. Yet his eyes held a watchful intensity that spoke of a mind calculating possibilities and preparing defenses. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his accented English carrying with crystalline clarity through the hushed room. We gather here not merely to solve the mystery of a vanishing man, but to understand the psychology of guilt, redemption, and the extraordinary lengths to which conscience and cunning will drive the human heart. The mechanical solution, impossibility made possible. He moved with characteristic precision toward the center of the semicircle, his hands gesturing with the economy of movement that marked his most intense concentration. The impossible disappearance of Sir Montague Blackwood from his throne during 30 seconds of darkness has puzzled us all. Yet impossibility, mes amis, exists only in the realm of inadequate understanding. The solution lies not in supernatural intervention, but in the marriage of old architecture with desperate ingenuity. The ancient dumb-waiter system, supposedly inoperable for decades, required only minor modifications to serve our conspirators' purpose. During the crucial blackout, Sir Montague was concealed within the specially weighted golden gift basket and transported through this forgotten passage to a prepared chamber below the ballroom. Lady Pemberton gasped audibly. But surely someone would have noticed the basket being moved, the sounds of the mechanism. Indeed, madame, which brings us to the most crucial element of our deception, the impersonation that made such mechanical trickery possible. The false Father Winter, children see truth. Poirot's green eyes swept across each face with penetrating intensity. The children of St. Bartholomew's orphanage provided the most damning evidence, though their innocent observations were initially dismissed as childish fancy. The scent of iodine, the ink-stained forefinger, the different texture of the beard, these details pointed not to Sir Montague Blackwood, but to someone else entirely. His gaze fixed upon Mr. Pembridge with laser precision. Someone with daily access to medical supplies for treating minor injuries, whose hands bore the permanent stains of extensive correspondence, whose intimate knowledge of Sir Montague's mannerisms could fool adults, but whose physical characteristics could not perfectly replicate those familiar to observant children. The secretary's carefully maintained composure began to show hairline cracks, though he remained silent. The performance was masterful, Monsieur Pembridge. You possessed the voice, the bearing, the intimate knowledge of Sir Montague's habits. Yet children notice what adults overlook, the slight differences in scent, touch, and movement that betrayed the impersonation. The industrial guilt, the weight of conscience. Dr. Carstairs, unable to maintain his professional silence any longer, spoke with evident anguish. Sir Montague was dying, Monsieur Poirot. Advanced cardiac disease brought on by years of stress and guilt over the industrial accidents. The anonymous letters from Miss Thorne had pushed him beyond endurance. He could no longer live with the knowledge of what his cost-cutting measures had done to innocent families. Ah, Doctor, and here we approach the psychological heart of our mystery, Poirot replied with gentle understanding. Sir Montague's plan was born of desperation, not merely to escape his failing health, but to orchestrate his own disappearance in such a way that the truth of his industrial negligence would be revealed and proper compensation provided to the injured families. The revelation struck the assembled group with visible force. Mrs. Ashford pressed her handkerchief to her lips, while Gerald's face reflected dawning comprehension of the magnitude of his uncle's hidden burden. The conspiracy revealed 3 minds, 1 deception. The plan required 3 conspirators, Poirot continued, beginning to pace with the measured rhythm that indicated his little grey cells working at maximum intensity. Dr. Carstairs provided medical expertise and the sedatives necessary for the deception. Sir Montague himself was to play his final role as the repentant Father Winter. And you, Monsieur Pembridge, were to manage the theatrical elements and handle the legal documentation. He paused dramatically, allowing the full import of his words to settle. But the plan, ingenious as it was, contained elements that troubled the careful observer. The 3 drops of blood were placed, not splashed, too precise for genuine violence. The note reading "Forgive" was positioned for maximum dramatic effect. The mask strap was torn rather than unbuckled, suggesting theatrical haste rather than genuine struggle. Inspector Bradshaw leaned forward with professional interest. You're suggesting the entire scene was staged. Indeed, Inspector. But staged by whom, and for what ultimate purpose? Here we must distinguish between the original noble intention and the darker manipulation that corrupted it. The true architect, Pembridge's hidden game. Poirot's voice took on a harder edge as he turned his full attention to the secretary. The crimson ribbon binding the industrial records, the same distinctive shade used by Miss Thorne in her embroidery work. You purchased supplies from her, did you not, Monsieur Pembridge? Not merely for Christmas parcels, but to create the physical evidence that would support your carefully constructed narrative. Pembridge's hands began to tremble almost imperceptibly, though his voice remained steady. I acted only to help Sir Montague achieve his final wishes, his confession, his arrangements for compensation. Up to a point, perhaps, Poirot replied with devastating precision. But when I mentioned potential flaws that might invalidate the revised will, your eyes sought not the supposed heir, but the hiding place where you had concealed the documents. These are movements of the spirit that betray more than hands ever will. The psychological pressure was mounting inexorably. You saw an opportunity within Sir Montague's moral crisis, did you not? With the old man disappeared and the family believing him merely missing, you could manipulate the situation to your considerable advantage. As executor of the revised will, administrator of the compensation fund, guardian of the family's financial interests, you would wield unprecedented power over millions of pounds. The psychological trap springs. Mrs. Ashford's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Where is my brother, Monsieur Poirot? If this elaborate deception was successful, where is Montague now? It was the question that struck at the heart of Pembridge's carefully constructed facade. His eyes darted involuntarily toward the floor, toward the hidden chamber below, and in that instant of unconscious revelation, Poirot's trap was sprung. Just so, madame. The chamber below was prepared with meticulous care. Provisions, medical supplies, writing materials for the confession that would complete Sir Montague's plan for redemption. But something went wrong, did it not, Monsieur Pembridge? Something that transformed willing conspiracy into something far darker. The secretary's composure finally began to crack under the relentless pressure of Poirot's psychological assault. The little grey cells, they perceive patterns that the guilty mind cannot conceal. We shall have our final answers very soon. The stage set for ultimate revelation. As the winter afternoon light faded outside Thornfield Hall's frost-etched windows, the assembled company sat in stunned silence, absorbing the implications of Poirot's methodical revelations. The mechanical mystery had been solved, the psychological motivations laid bare, yet the ultimate fate of Sir Montague Blackwood remained tantalizingly hidden. Poirot stood before them with the satisfaction of a master craftsman who had successfully exposed the hidden architecture of human deception, yet his eyes held the promise of deeper revelations yet to come. The impossible vanishing of Father Winter was no longer a mystery, but the full truth of conscience, manipulation, and ultimate justice awaited the final act of this elaborate moral drama. The stage was set for the complete revelation that would transform understanding into justice and mystery into truth. The silence stretched taut as violin strings in Lady Pemberton's drawing-room. Poirot allowed the weight of his accusations to settle upon the assembled company like snow upon winter ground, each word adding to the inexorable burden that was crushing Mr. Theodore Pembridge's carefully maintained composure. The psychological trap springs. The chamber below was prepared with meticulous care, Poirot continued, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had unraveled so many mysteries. Provisions for several days, medical supplies, writing materials for the confession that would complete Sir Montague's moral redemption. But something went terribly wrong during those first crucial hours, did it not, Monsieur Pembridge? The secretary's hands trembled as he attempted to adjust his wire-rimmed spectacles, but the gesture only drew attention to his obvious distress. His eyes darted involuntarily toward the floor, toward the hidden chamber below. And in that instant of unconscious revelation, Poirot's psychological trap was finally sprung. "You see, mes amis," Poirot observed with characteristic precision, "the guilty mind cannot resist the compulsion to look toward what it seeks to hide. The little grey cells, they observe such movements of the spirit that betray more than hands ever will." Dr. Carstairs, who had been maintaining his professional composure throughout the investigation, suddenly appeared deeply troubled. "Monsieur Poirot, if you're suggesting that something happened to Montague in that chamber—" "Indeed, Doctor. But first, let us address a curious detail that has troubled me from the beginning. The anonymous letters Sir Montague received, they contained accusations about industrial negligence, but they also contained a most revealing error: the handwriting revelation." Poirot withdrew a letter from his jacket pocket with characteristic precision. Sir Montague was known for one particular spelling weakness. He invariably misspelled the word accommodate, writing it with a single EM. Yet the anonymous letters spelled this word correctly. This suggested either that the letters were not written by someone intimately familiar with his correspondence habits, or— He paused dramatically, his penetrating gaze fixing upon Pembridge. Or they were written by someone whose professional training had eliminated such errors. Someone like a secretary who had spent years correcting his employer's spelling mistakes. Lady Pemberton gasped audibly. "Theodore, you wrote those letters." Pembridge's remaining defenses began to crumble like autumn leaves. I thought if he believed the accusations were coming from outside sources, he might be more willing to make appropriate financial arrangements without admitting legal liability. You never intended for his conscience to overwhelm his pragmatic nature, Poirot finished. But Sir Montague's guilt ran deeper than you anticipated. The letters, instead of prompting careful financial settlements, drove him to seek complete moral redemption through staged disappearance and public confession. The true crime revealed. Inspector Bradshaw leaned forward with professional intensity. "Are you saying Pembridge manipulated his own employer into this elaborate deception?" "Initially, yes," Poirot replied. "But the plan, once set in motion, evolved beyond anyone's control. Sir Montague's weak heart, the stress of the performance, the sedatives provided by Dr. Carstairs, these created a medical crisis that transformed noble intentions into tragedy. Dr. Carstairs buried his face in his hands. I warned him about the risks. His cardiac condition was precarious. Any additional stress could prove fatal. But he insisted on proceeding with the plan. And here, Doctor, we encounter the crucial detail that explains everything," Poirot continued. "You provided Sir Montague with emergency nitroglycerin medication for his heart condition, did you not?" "Of course. He carried it always. A small black morocco case containing the pills that could save his life during an attack." Poirot's eyes sharpened with the intensity I had learned to associate with his most brilliant deductions. "Yet when you examined his abandoned costume on the throne, you found no such case. Where, then, was this vital medication during the crucial hours when Sir Montague most needed it?" The question struck Pembridge like a physical blow. His face drained of color as the full implications became clear. "You removed the nitroglycerin case," Poirot stated with quiet certainty. "Perhaps initially as a precaution, to prevent Sir Montague from changing his mind and abandoning the plan by medicating himself back to normal function. But when his heart began to fail in the hidden chamber, when he desperately needed those pills to survive, they were no longer within his reach. The accidental death becomes deliberate concealment." Pembridge's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "He was supposed to remain sedated for only a few hours, but when I checked on him that first night, he was agitated, panicked. He said the plan was wrong, that he needed to face the families directly, to make personal apologies. He threatened to expose everything, the deception, Dr. Carstairs' involvement, my role in the anonymous letters." "And so you made a calculated decision," Poirot observed with devastating precision. "Rather than provide the medication that might have saved his life, you allowed nature to take its course." Dr. Carstairs let out a strangled cry. "Dear God, Theodore, I gave you explicit instructions about the nitroglycerin. You knew how crucial it was to his survival." "I panicked," Pembridge confessed, tears now streaming down his face. "If he had emerged and confessed everything, we would all have faced criminal charges. The families would have received nothing because the company would have collapsed under scandal. I thought his death would be seen as natural, that the plan could still work, that justice could still be served without destroying everyone involved." "The physical evidence," explained. "And so we understand the true nature of our physical evidence," Poirot continued methodically. "The 3 drops of blood were genuine. Cardiac hemorrhaging as Sir Montague's weakened heart finally failed without his medication. You place them carefully beside the throne to suggest violence and foul play. He gestured toward the abandoned costume. The torn mask strap, the note reading "Forgive." These were Sir Montague's own final struggles and pleas, not theatrical props. The crimson tinsel fragment came from Miss Thorne's embroidery work, which you had commissioned for the deception, hoping to implicate her in the supposed kidnapping. Inspector Bradshaw was already moving toward the door. The body. Where is Sir Montague now? Pembridge's final confession came in a broken whisper. I couldn't bring myself to dispose of him properly. The old dumbwaiter system, I used it to transport him to the storage area above the ballroom, where the snow machines are housed. The cold preserved him. I wrapped him in canvas and concealed him in the hopper mechanism. The dramatic discovery. Within minutes, Inspector Bradshaw's constables had located the grim evidence. The mechanical snow that had created such festive atmosphere during the Christmas gala had concealed the mortal remains of the man who had played Father Winter for the final time. When they returned, Bradshaw's lined face had grown graver still. We've found him, he announced simply. Wrapped in canvas in the snow machine hopper. The cold had preserved the body remarkably well. Lady Pemberton made a low sound of grief and steadied herself against the mantelpiece. The full horror of the situation, that Sir Montague's body had remained hidden above their heads throughout the investigation, struck everyone with visceral impact. The moral reckoning. Tiens, industrial guilt remains, Poirot observed solemnly as Pembridge was led away in custody. The families injured by chemical exposure still deserve compensation. The moral debt Sir Montague sought to pay does not vanish with his death. Mrs. Ashford spoke with quiet dignity through her tears. The family will honor Montague's intentions. Whatever the legal complications, those children and their families will receive proper medical care and financial compensation. The industrial records will be made public, and justice will finally be served. Dr. Carstairs faced his own professional reckoning with characteristic stoicism. I violated every principle of medical ethics in my desire to help an old friend achieve redemption. My license will be revoked, my reputation destroyed, but perhaps that is appropriate justice for my role in this tragedy. Young Gerald Blackwood, who had spent days fearing accusations of murder, now faced a different kind of reckoning. Uncle Montague's death doesn't erase my debts or my mistakes, he said quietly. But it does give me the chance to honor his memory by reforming my life completely. I'm done gambling with other people's money, or with my own character. Poirot's philosophical conclusion. As the winter afternoon light faded outside Thornfield Hall's frost-etched windows, Poirot stood before the fireplace with the contemplative air that marked the conclusion of his most complex cases. You see, mon ami Hastings, he said quietly, how the conscience can drive men to both noble and terrible acts. Sir Montague sought redemption through elaborate theatre, but redemption cannot be staged. It must be earned through genuine acknowledgement and appropriate action. And did he earn it? I asked. Poirot's smile was gentle but sad. He began the process, but others must complete it for him. The industrial victims will receive their compensation, the truth of the negligence will be revealed, and perhaps some measure of justice will emerge from this tragedy. He moved toward the window, his silhouette neat against the pale winter sky. The impossible vanishing of Father Winter was never truly impossible, merely hidden beneath layers of human psychology, medical knowledge, and mechanical ingenuity. But the real mystery was not how a man could disappear, but why good intentions so often become corrupted by fear, greed, and the desperate desire to control consequences. As we prepared to leave Thornfield Hall, the artificial snow machine stood silent at last, their hoppers emptied of their terrible secret. The Christmas decorations seemed suddenly garish and inappropriate, their festive cheer a stark contrast to the moral complexity we had uncovered. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said as we stepped into the honest December cold. We have had enough of theatrical redemption. Let us seek the warmth of genuine human kindness, and hope that by next Christmas, the children of Manchester will have received the justice their suffering demands. The mystery of Father Winter's vanishing was solved, but the deeper questions of conscience, responsibility, and moral obligation would continue long after the last of the artificial snow had melted away. In the end, Poirot had revealed not just the mechanics of an impossible crime, but the tragic human truth that lies at the heart of all great mysteries, the eternal struggle between what we wish to be and what we actually are. As our carriage carried us away from Thornfield Hall, I reflected that this case had been among Poirot's finest achievements, not merely solving a puzzle, but illuminating the complex psychology of guilt, redemption, and the terrible prices we pay when conscience finally overwhelms self-preservation. The little grey cells had once again triumphed, but the victory felt more somber than celebratory, tinged with the melancholy that accompanies all profound truths about human nature. The snow continued to fall over London, covering the city in pristine white, while somewhere in the hidden chambers of the human heart, the eternal battle between good and evil continued its ancient dance. The winter morning that followed Pembridge's arrest brought a peculiar quality of light to Thornfield Hall. Pale and unforgiving, stripping away the theatrical shadows that had concealed so much deception. Inspector Bradshaw worked with methodical precision to complete the official procedures, though I could see that this case had affected him more profoundly than most. The immediate reckoning. The charges against Theodore Pembridge would prove complex, as Bradshaw explained to the assembled family. Not murder in the traditional sense, but criminal negligence resulting in death, conspiracy to defraud, concealment of a body, and manipulation of a dying man's final wishes. The courts will determine the precise degree of culpability, but I expect he'll face significant prison time. Dr. Edmund Carstairs accepted his professional destruction with the same careful dignity he had once brought to his medical practice. I violated every principle of medical ethics, he told us quietly as the medical board's representatives departed with their damning report. 40 years of healing people, and it ends with my participation in a deception that cost a man his life. My license will be revoked, my reputation destroyed, but perhaps that is appropriate justice for my role in this tragedy. Mrs. Vivian Ashford, despite her profound grief, demonstrated remarkable strength in the face of catastrophe. Montague's final will was properly witnessed and legally binding, she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The bulk of his estate was designated for charitable foundations, specifically naming the victims of the Manchester facility. Whatever the legal complications of his death, those families will receive their compensation. I'll see to it personally. Gerald's transformation. Young Gerald Blackwood, who had spent days under suspicion of murder, now faced a different kind of moral reckoning. The inheritance that had once seemed threatened was now secured, yet the young man appeared more troubled than relieved. "The money feels tainted," he confided to Poirot as we prepared our final departure. "Every pound carries the weight of Uncle Montague's guilt and those children's suffering. I've already contacted my creditors to arrange extended payment schedules. No more gambling, no more frivolous expenses. I intend to establish a trust fund for the industrial victims' children, their education and medical care. Perhaps that's how I can honor Uncle Montague's memory properly." Poirot studied him with approval. "Your uncle sought redemption through theatrical disappearance, monsieur, but you have the opportunity to achieve it through genuine reform and charitable action. The little grey cells, they detect sincerity in your words. May your actions prove equally authentic. Justice for the forgotten." Miss Elara Thorne returned to Thornfield Hall that afternoon, no longer the frightened seamstress who had written anonymous letters, but a woman whose suffering had finally found public acknowledgement. The legal documents establishing the compensation fund bore her signature as the primary representative of the injured families. Sir Montague's death doesn't erase what happened to our children, she said with quiet dignity. But his confession and the financial arrangements provide hope that other families won't suffer as we have. Industrial safety regulations will be strengthened, medical care will be provided, and perhaps some good can emerge from this tragedy. Lady Pemberton, still shaken by the revelation that her Christmas gala had concealed such horror, spoke with renewed determination. The annual charity event will continue, but it will be dedicated to the Manchester families and others injured by industrial negligence. No more theatrical generosity. Genuine assistance, ongoing support, real accountability. Poirot's Moral Reflections. As we stood in the now empty ballroom where the impossible vanishing had occurred, Poirot reflected on the psychological complexities that had driven every participant in this elaborate tragedy. Consider, mon ami Hastings, how each person's actions were motivated by what they believed to be noble intentions. Sir Montague sought redemption for industrial negligence. Dr. Carstairs provided medical assistance to a dying friend. Even Pembridge initially wrote the anonymous letters, hoping to prompt appropriate compensation without legal complications. He gestured toward the empty throne where Father Winter had made his final performance. Yet human nature, she is never as simple as our intentions. Fear corrupts nobility, self-interest distorts compassion, and the desire to control consequences often produces the very disasters we seek to prevent. Sir Montague chose theatrical disappearance over direct confession. Dr. Carstairs chose misguided loyalty over medical ethics, and Pembridge chose manipulation over honest assistance. The theatrical elements of this case remind us that human beings often prefer dramatic gestures to genuine moral action. True redemption requires courage to face consequences directly, not elaborate schemes to control how those consequences are perceived. The lasting resolution. 3 weeks later, London had grown weary of the headlines, but the business of genuine justice had only begun. The first clinic opened in a former Manchester counting house, where ledgers had given way to medical instruments and hope. Mothers sat in chairs that did not wobble, and children received treatment that might have prevented their suffering had it been available years earlier. Gerald Blackwood surprised even his defenders by selling his motor car, dismissing his tailor, and writing to creditors with a schedule of repayment that rang with sobriety rather than bravado. Mrs. Ashford took him to the country estate, declaring that honest work must blow through him like weather. Whether the transformation would prove lasting remained to be seen, but the first steps were genuinely promising. Dr. Carstairs faced his disgrace with characteristic stoicism, using his remaining time before the final hearing to compile detailed medical records that would assist the industrial victim's treatment. "If my career must end in scandal," he said, "at least let my final professional act serve those who need healing most." The Christmas spirit restored. On a crisp December morning, as fine snow powdered the pavements of London, Poirot and I walked through Hyde Park, where children negotiated treaties no diplomat could better, and skaters stitched white lines upon the frozen pond. Near the park's center, we encountered a snowman of impossible neatness, absurdly formal, perfectly symmetrical. Poirot halted, studied the creation with professional interest, then moved a single pebble eye a fraction to restore a balance only he could perceive. He stepped back with evident satisfaction. "Order restored," he said, bowing minutely to the silent, ridiculous sentinel. "You see, Hastings, one polishes a little corner of the world. It suffices." A letter had arrived that morning from Elara Thorne, written on paper faintly scented with machine oil. "It is a strange thing," she wrote, "to read of justice in the newspapers and then feel it at one's door. The doctor at the new clinic says my boy will walk with a brace by spring, and the compensation will ensure proper care for years to come." Between the folds lay a thin twist of crimson silk, neither bitter nor forgiving, simply true. The final truth. As we turned toward home through the pale winter air, leaving the careful snowman and the last chill of the affair behind us, Poirot offered his final observations on the case that had consumed our Christmas season. The impossible vanishing of Father Winter was never truly impossible, mon ami, merely hidden beneath layers of human psychology, medical knowledge, and mechanical ingenuity. But the real mystery was not how a man could disappear, but why good intentions so often become corrupted by fear, greed, and the desperate desire to control consequences. Sir Montague's industrial guilt, Dr. Carstairs' misguided compassion, Pembridge's manipulative opportunism, each represented a different aspect of moral failure. Yet there is hope in the resolution. The injured families will receive compensation, industrial safety will be improved, and perhaps most importantly, young Gerald has discovered that inherited wealth carries inherited responsibilities. London carried on with its accustomed noise and bustle, yet underneath that familiar indifference, a handful of rooms had grown warm, a few debts were being honorably paid, and a little corner of the world had been polished to a shine. The Christmas spirit of genuine generosity had finally emerged from tragedy, not through elaborate theatrical gestures, but through simple, direct action, guided by conscience rather than convenience. The artificial snow machines at Thornfield Hall stood forever silent, their hoppers emptied of their terrible secret, while honest December snow fell clean and pure over a city where justice, however delayed and imperfect, had finally been served. The little grey cells had triumphed once again, revealing not just the mechanics of an elaborate deception, but the eternal truth that genuine redemption requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to face consequences directly rather than through theatrical substitutes. Epilogue: The Measure of Justice. "Come, mon ami," Poirot said as we approached the warmth of Whitehaven Mansions. "There is hot tisane, and the year grows young with possibility. We have had enough of staged redemptions and impossible vanishings. Let us seek the simple pleasure of genuine human kindness, and hope that by next Christmas the children of Manchester will know only the honest snow of winter, not the artificial variety that conceals such terrible secrets." The mystery of Father Winter's vanishing was solved, but the deeper questions of conscience, responsibility, and moral obligation would continue long after the last of the artificial snow had melted away. In the end, Poirot had revealed not just a crime, but a profound truth about human nature, that the eternal struggle between what we wish to be and what we actually are can drive us to both noble and terrible acts, and that true justice lies not in theatrical gestures, but in the quiet courage to do what is right, regardless of personal cost. The case was closed, but its lessons would endure, a reminder that even in the darkest winter of human failing, the possibility of genuine redemption remains, waiting for those brave enough to seek it through honest action rather than elaborate deception. The first honest snow of the new year fell upon London with the gentle persistence of truth finally acknowledged, each flake settling where it belonged without theatrical machinery or artificial assistance. From the windows of Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot observed this natural transformation with the satisfaction of a man who had witnessed justice emerge from the most elaborate of deceptions. The Legal Reckoning. Inspector Bradshaw's final report arrived with the Morning Post, bearing news that surprised no one who had witnessed Poirot's methodical unraveling of the conspiracy. Theodore Pembridge received 7 years' imprisonment for manslaughter, conspiracy, and fraud, the judge proving particularly severe regarding his exploitation of Sir Montague's medical vulnerability. The deliberate concealment of life-saving medication, the judicial summary read, transforms what might have been tragic accident into calculated homicide. Dr. Carstairs faced his professional tribunal with characteristic dignity, accepting the permanent revocation of his medical license without protest. 40 years of healing, he reflected to us during our final meeting, concluded by my participation in a deception that cost a life. The punishment fits the transgression, and perhaps my disgrace will serve as warning to other physicians who might confuse friendship with professional duty. The transformations. Young Gerald Blackwood's reformation proved more substantial than even Poirot's optimistic assessment had predicted. The gambling debts were methodically repaid, the fashionable lifestyle abandoned for honest clerical work with an industrial safety firm. His engagement to Miss Catherine Henley, daughter of a Methodist minister, raised eyebrows in certain circles, but earned Poirot's approval. "She possesses the moral backbone," the detective observed, "that will keep your reformed character properly aligned." Mrs. Ashford demonstrated unexpected administrative brilliance as executor of her brother's estate, transforming guilt-driven charity into systematic justice. The compensation fund exceeded even Sir Montague's original intentions, establishing 3 medical clinics, educational scholarships, and ongoing monitoring systems for industrial chemical exposure. "Montague always claimed I had no head for business," she confided, "but moral indignation provides excellent motivation for learning financial management." Justice made manifest. Miss Elara Thorne's transformation from desperate seamstress to recognized advocate proved perhaps the most satisfying resolution. Her testimony before the parliamentary inquiry prompted comprehensive revision of workers' compensation laws, while her son's medical treatment, funded by the settlement, progressed beyond anyone's hopes. The specialized braces allowed him to walk unassisted for the first time, while educational support revealed intelligence previously obscured by physical limitations. Lady Pemberton converted the annual Christmas Gala into the Montague Blackwood Foundation for Industrial Safety, permanently headquartered in the ballroom where Father Winter had made his final performance. The ornate throne was replaced by a simple memorial plaque, in memory of those whose suffering teaches us the true cost of prosperity. The artificial snow machines were dismantled entirely, their mechanical deception no longer welcome in a space dedicated to honest accountability. The philosophical resolution. On a mild spring evening, as we walked through Hyde Park where daffodils had replaced winter snow, Poirot offered his final reflections on the case that had consumed our Christmas season. "The human heart, mon ami, contains both capacity for great evil and possibility of genuine redemption. The theatrical elements, the costume, the staged disappearance, the dramatic timing, remind us that human beings often prefer grand gestures to simple honesty." He paused beside the pond where children sailed toy boats with serious concentration. Sir Montague sought redemption through elaborate performance, yet true atonement requires not theatrical displays, but steady, consistent action guided by conscience rather than convenience. He began the process, but others had to complete it for him. A letter from Miss Thorne had arrived that morning, no longer bearing the faint scent of machine oil. Her son had won a scholarship to grammar school, while she had been elected to Manchester City Council on a platform of industrial reform. "It is strange," she wrote, "to discover that anonymous letters can sometimes achieve more justice than signed petitions." The final truth. When December returned to London, Poirot received a small package wrapped in crimson silk, not the bitter ribbon of accusation, but grateful acknowledgement of truth finally recognized. Inside lay a wooden ornament carved by Miss Thorne's son, depicting not Father Winter on his throne, but a family gathered around a warm hearth, safe and whole. "The impossible vanishing," Poirot murmured, placing the ornament carefully on his mantelpiece, "was never truly impossible, merely hidden beneath layers of human complexity. The real mystery was not how a man could disappear, but how justice can emerge from tragedy when conscience finally overcomes convenience." As honest snow continued falling outside our windows, covering London in natural beauty that required no artificial enhancement, the case of Father Winter's vanishing took its place among Poirot's most psychologically complex investigations. the little grey cells, had triumphed once again, revealing not just the mechanics of elaborate deception, but the eternal possibility that even in the darkest winter of human failing, genuine redemption remains achievable for those brave enough to seek it through honest action rather than theatrical substitutes. The artificial snow had melted away forever, but the warmth of authentic charity burned brighter than any mechanical display, illuminating the path toward justice that serves not vanity, but genuine human need.